So we are on day 5, I believe, of our stretching series, or our 12 days of Christmas stretching. And today is all about the hip flexors and the quads. So if I just get myself into an area where you guys can see, it's going to be a little bit of a short and sweet session today because I've mistimed my clients, and not my clients, but clients their rivals, so there might be a little bit of background noise as we go. Quads. So your quads basically are starting at the top of your pelvis here, at the top of the hip. They're 4 muscles, so we have a deep one, the intermedius muscle, lateral and medial muscle, and they attach in the tendon which contains your kneecap on the top of the tibia. So they're crossing 2 joints. So when you're thinking about your hip and your quads, you want to think that they're crossing a hip joint and the knee joint. So your traditional quad stretch is here. However, if you're kinked at the hip here, you lose some of the stretch. Similarly, if you're here, but then you just tip at the hips here to increase your stretch, you're losing some of the range. Okay? So think when you're thinking the quads muscle, so the defined muscle at the front of your thigh, it crosses the hip and the knee joint. The hip flexors start, if you think about the base of your rib cage and put fingers towards the spine at the back, they start quite high up. They become like a little strap muscle of the psoas, which comes in around the pelvic bowl, and you have your iliacus muscle, which sits, and that attaches onto the hip. And that is called one of your deep hip flexors. So the quads, because of where they are, can help flex the leg at the hip, and also the action is to extend the knee. Your deeper muscles are your iliopsoas tendon, and they flex the hip from a deep point of view, but they also help you stabilize through the chest and the trunk. Okay. So traditional stretches for quads would be here. If you can't quite get your hand around your thigh, you strap and get the stretch. Same again, if your knee is in front, you're going to lose the stretch. So your best bet is coming knees in line. Okay? If you are going to take that into that bigger stretch, there's 2 ways to do it. You can tuck the tail, as I'm wobbling a bit. I can do it this way and stick my bottom out. I've lost the stretch over the hip. So I actually need to think about gently tucking my tail underneath me to come into a deeper stretch. Okay. Now if you do that, you might lose the leg forward unless you're quite mobile through your quads. So as you tuck under through the pelvis, you'll increase the quad stretch rather than pulling this way. The other way to do it is to stick your belly out. Okay? So when you tuck underneath, you're going to get the hip flexor side of it, and when you push your belly forwards, you might get more the quad side of it. So depending on which bit of you is the tightest, that's where you'll get the stretch. Now in terms of doing those, if you're out and about, you can use the chair, just placing your foot up on a chair, keeping it level, tuck the tail underneath you, shift the hips forward. So if you're in the office and you've been sat down and working, you stand yourself up, you place your shin on the chair, you tuck your tail underneath you. You can do that while you're out and about as well. So if you're leaning against a wall, you can place your heel against the wall, and again just tuck the tail underneath you. If you're sat in a chair, there's no reason you can't turn side on and get your side and your hip flexor stretched this way. And if you wanted to bring in some movement, you can do that as well. So your big thing is you feel it across the hip and you feel it across the quads. Traditional knee stretches would be on a floor where you've got some support and you go into that stretch. And if you do it this way, you're losing the hip component, so you do need to change it. And then you get that hip component coming in. To increase the quad component, that's when we bend and do that way. I personally don't ever give this stretch purely because of the pressure around the knees. So they would be your basic stretches that you could use for your quads and your hip flexors that you could do out and about. In terms of lying down, your stretch would be on the floor and you bend the knee. If you find that your tail comes up, we're tight through the hip. So you want to lengthen through the lower spine and bend the knee. And to increase the stretch, we pull closer in. If you wanted a bigger stretch, you might choose to do that on your elbows, and then you might find you lose some range. Okay? If you are struggling, people tend to have a strap if they can't quite reach, and they can use the strap to then pull. Okay? So when you're flat down, you take out the hip component, and you're higher up, you're adding in the hip component. You just have to be aware of your lower back and your hips coming up off the bed. Okay? The one thing you do need to be aware of, which we see a lot of, and that would be wherever you choose or however you choose to do your stretches. Stretching. Remember, your quads muscle is the front of the thigh. If you pull out here and your leg is away, you're tight through the outside aspect. So you want to make sure that you're in line. So you don't want to be stretching that way. And again, the biggie, that you're not bending at the hips to achieve the stretch. So short and sweet today, less than 10 minutes. Hopefully if you have any questions, because it was a very quick, short, sharp session today, shoot me a message if there's anything else you'd like to. And then I believe tomorrow we're talking all about the hamstring muscle. If there has been any sort of unique clarification on regarding the quads and hip flexors, then we can go through that tomorrow. Thanks for being here.